You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
Hi, I'm Mark Golub, and some contemporary terms seem so out of place. They're often called oxymorons. Somewhat humorous examples of oxymorons might include military intelligence or airline food. And for many, another contemporary oxymoron is the phrase, a Jewish cop. We don't often imagine a Jew, especially an Orthodox Jew, raised in a very observant household with an Orthodox rabbi for a father. We don't normally imagine such a Jew growing up and choosing to become a policeman. But that's exactly what our guest did today. It's an honor for me to welcome back Morty Dzikansky, known to all his friends as Morty, who not only chose to become a New York City policeman, but went on to become a sort of super cop who traveled the world, primarily to Israel, but also to Russia, Egypt, Morocco, Spain, Turkey, fighting terrorism and helping the New York City Police Department become more aware of and adept at preventing terrorist attacks in this country. And as a retired New York PD terrorism expert and an author, Morty has written a wonderful, gripping book with Robert Slater called Terrorist Cop, published by Barricade Books. And Morty's kind enough to join us on Shalom TV to talk about his life as an NYPD terrorism expert who spent much of his career bringing terrorists to justice, and to give us his sense of how real the terrorist threat is today. And Morty, thank you so much for joining us again.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
I told you off camera, it's a wonderful book, a wonderful read, Terrorist Cop. Thank you for writing it. And there's so many things I want to talk to you about. I want to get something out of the way. And again, I've read virtually all of the book, but our viewers don't know much about you. I want to ask the question as if I don't know. How in the world does an Orthodox Jew decide to be a policeman? How does it happen that you become a policeman?
Well, my grandfather was a Rosh Yeshiva in Lithuania. My father was a rabbi at Yeshiva University for 45 years, and I'm a Yeshiva graduate. But unfortunately, it took 8 separate yeshivas till I finally graduated. So therefore, I knew I wasn't destined for the rabbinate. So I sort of segued into this as a career.
Okay. You tell the story in the book about how you almost find this stack of papers by accident, and something about a call by the NYPD to new recruits attracted you. Do you remember this story?
Yeah. Well, my growing up, again, traditional Orthodox, accountant was probably going to be my chosen career. But it wasn't a calling. It wasn't something that I said, this is really what I want to do. You know, there were certain fringe benefits, and it seemed like just a typical good job. I was playing basketball one Sunday morning. In the JC.
You are big.
What's that?
You are big.
Well,
right?
That's why basketball was my game of choice.
You're 6'3"?
6'3".
220?
220.
Okay. You were always big?
Always big.
Okay. You are bigger than the typical Jew.
But much gentler than the typical Jew.
Okay. So you're playing ball and you're big.
I'm playing ball at the local JCH. It's a Sunday morning, and I see a stack of flyers specifically asking for Orthodox cops.
Why?
What happened was, up to then, the civil service test to become a policeman or police officer was given on Saturdays. So the one real prohibition of joining the department as a Shomer Shabbos individual was the test. If you could get past the test, then you could get into the police department and let them work with you in terms of the scheduling. So in my case, I would become the third yarmulke-wearing Orthodox cop in the NYPD.
I was fascinated to read that when you took the test, there were other Orthodox Jews taking it at the same time.
There were a few other Orthodox Jews, but interesting enough, there were also Seventh-day Adventists. So this was also a separate issue for them. So they gave a test on a Friday. The normal test was given on a Saturday. And back then, you had 50,000 applicants for 2,000 positions. So I really got chosen and lucky that I was one of them that were picked, and it turned out to be a fabulous career.
Yes. You were a yarmulke-wearing police academy recruit, correct?
Yes.
Did anybody give you grief because you were yarmulke-wearing and Orthodox?
Well, I think, like you said, size does matter in this case. And I think because they automatically thought, based on my size, that I was a tough guy. So they assumed that, better not, fool around with him. But the truth is, I always tell people, the fact that I was wearing a yarmulke, I think benefited me in respect that if you're proud of who you are and you're proud of your religion, it's only when you're trying to be in denial or not being open about who you are, then people will pick on you. So in my case, I was out of the closet. I was Morty the Jew, and whether you liked it or not, that doesn't mean I still don't have to do my job 100%. So I think they saw both things together, proud of who I was and wanting to do the job. So I think that really made it work out well.
You write in the book how that you anticipate with some degree of dread telling your father, and then you finally do, and you describe his one-word response. But I want you to tell me more of the story. What happens when you tell your father you're going to be a New York City policeman?
The reason why I was hesitant, at least initially, was I thought my father would think it's too dangerous. Not the aspect that being a civil service person was not a worthy position, but it was more that you're going to you're going to carry a gun. Nice Jewish boys don't carry guns. So I had to be gentle about it, and I couldn't say, this is what I'm doing. I first had to see if it was going to work out. So I gingerly said, I'm thinking about it. And the next thing you know, I'm graduating from the academy. And once he saw that, this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision to do for 2 months or 6 months or whatever, that I was going to try to make it into a career. And again, I was young. I was 20 years old to start with a career. I think he really respected it. And again, he was always a very by-the-book, pay your taxes, very honest individual. So this really worked out perfect for him. This was a truth-seeking job.
You write very honestly and movingly that you believe had your mother lived, and your mother died of cancer when she was very young, 45, I think,
right,
and you were 7 years old.
Right.
But you do say that you think if your mother had lived, you would not have joined the academy.
No, I think in terms of having a traditional life, not going to 8 separate yeshivas the way I did, moving around on a regular basis. Life would have been much more normal. Although my father did a fabulous job. He was a fundraiser for Yeshiva University for 45 years, the hardest working person I've ever seen. And he had to take care of a rambunctious, son. So I think he did a great job with it. But again, a traditional home, as I'm trying to raise my kids now, sort of leads to, I think, a more traditional lifestyle. So I think, I might have just gone to one school, and maybe, who knows, maybe even the rabbinate or something of that nature.
But were you suggesting that somehow your mother would not have approved?
No, more just, I wouldn't have been bouncing around. I lived in so many different neighborhoods, and I was getting in trouble. But minor trouble.
What kind of trouble?
Hanging out with the wrong kids. I was always the good kid with the bad kids. So I never went to their stage, but that was sort of an attraction.
What do you think attracted you? How interesting.
I think I always did like a little bit of excitement. Not necessarily to be in the middle of it, but to be around it. So I think in my case, that's why police work was perfect, because it was being surrounded by a bit of craziness, but not being the one who's actually doing it, sort of being the overseer of it. So I think it was a natural progression.
Do you understand when a Jew would say to you, we don't expect a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, the son of a rabbi, to grow up and become a policeman?
It sounds very typical, and although today I'm so proud, I believe we have over 40 Orthodox people in the NYPD. So in a sense, I feel a bit of as a trailblazer. And again, I was the trailblazer in terms of investigative work. And again, investigative work found me, which is even more interesting. It wasn't like I was watching Kojak as a kid and I wanted to be, Telly Savalas. It just happened.
You say it just happened, but you write in the book that you helped make it happen. Almost every step of the way, you were trying to make something happen for yourself, even as you describe how you tried to get into Manhattan as your first assignment as a beat cop. They ultimately sent you to Bed-Stuy instead. But you always had some idea of what you wanted to do. And when you ultimately moved towards terrorism, we're going to talk about that in a moment, you had an interest here, and every time an event came your way, you seemed to capitalize it, use it, to move your career forward. And we should tell people, by the way, you ultimately went up to the police grade of first detective?
First grade detective.
First grade detective.
Which is very unusual for a first generation modern Orthodox Jewish boy.
Yes, so congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
And there are wonderful pictures in your book with Kelly, who was the police commissioner, with Bloomberg, et cetera. Wonderful pictures in this book. Anyway, the story you write about how you progress is something people should read in Terrorist Cop. I want to jump ahead if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, sure.
Okay? You marry Merrill, your wife. You're involved in a case I'm fascinated by, and I remember it vividly, the assassination of Mayor Kahana.
Right.
And you write in the book that you feel, in retrospect, the NYPD was not ready to handle such a case and made mistakes, but they brought you in because you were an Orthodox Jew. Tell the story of how you become involved in a Mayor Kahana murder.
It was Monday night, and I'll never forget, it was like it's yesterday. It was close to 9 o'clock, and the reason why I remember, of course, Monday Night Football, and back then I was a robbery detective. It meant every so often you have a little bit downtime, sort of as a fireman would wait for a call to come in. I was in my office, and we heard, that over the radio that there's a confirmed shots fired, meaning that there was a gunplay. Very often you get calls that are not correct calls, someone just trying to see the police react, but this was confirmed. And the big issue was it going to be on my precinct side of Lexington Avenue or on the other precinct? And then all of a sudden we heard, okay, it's on the other side. So we said, okay, let's take it easy. We don't have to get over there, because you don't want to go in another detective's territory unless he needs you. And then the call came in, there was actually Rabbi Kahana who was murdered. So my boss, knowing about my background, knowing how I grew up, actually told me, "You're coming with me." And
she was a woman.
She was a woman. Barbara Cecilia was her name, and she understood that I understood what was going on that evening. Now, when I say we weren't prepared for it, traditional policemen did not think in terms of terrorism. That was Big Brother's responsibility. Whether it's the FBI, whether it's the CIA, whether it's the military, all those other agencies that dealt with it. So it wasn't part of our purview. So I think I'm more trying to bring out that, we were great at solving murders, at catching robbers. The gumshoes, the detectives that I followed, were really, really good detectives. But they didn't have the broader picture in their mind. Let's see if there's a terrorist cell involved. I mean, I don't think the police department even had access to the papers that Nosera left behind, the boxes of the treasure trove of information that was later found. But I knew that night, the event had happened, that the Rabbi Kahana's murder wasn't because he was a member of the JDL. It wasn't a random act. It had totally what to do with him being a member of Knesset, with him founding the Koch Party, him being expelled from the Koch Party, and his right-wing views that he was proud of talking about, that he didn't keep quiet. And he was specifically targeted. And who would target him but an Islamic terrorist? So this was what I like to think is a no-brainer. Whether we could put together the whole picture, we weren't capable.
But you were almost the only police person then who really understood it that way.
Well, because I was traveling to Israel on a regular basis. Israel's been a part of my life since I was born. I read the Jewish press every week. I read the Jewish Week. I used to read Haaretz. I used to read Jerusalem Post. So I was always on top of what was going on in Israel, because I always had this dream of maybe someday making Aliyah. So I knew exactly, this was sort of my backyard. And I knew that, it wasn't going to be Joe Smith unless he converted, who shot Kahana that evening. This was, now the question is how wide of a ring, was this a lone wolf or was this an organized event? And it turns out it was very organized, which was really a prelude to what happened 9/11.
So let's jump to 9/11. And what's interesting here is your wife, Meryl, is at Ground Zero.
Right.
And you get a phone call. We've already talked to you about this, but give me the summary. What happens inside you on 9/11 when your wife calls you?
First, it didn't register. It just sounded, you know, of course I'm thinking in terms of work. And if it's a small plane that went into the towers, what's my function? I'm not part of the FAA, so I'm not going to determine whether it's an accident or not. But what I will be able to do is help make notifications, make sure families are reunited. That would be my role. Listen, this was my area. This was Manhattan South. I covered from 59th Street down to the Battery, from the east side to the west side. So this was literally my backyard. And
what level are you then?
I am a third grade detective.
Third grade detective. You're not uniformed.
I'm
You're
not,
plain clothes.
I am a homicide detective.
You're a homicide detective. I want to make sure everybody understands that.
I'm a homicide detective, and I actually say how when I left work on September 10th, 2001, we used to keep a record on an oak tag, just like they do on TV shows, of how many murders there are. And I think we were at 20, somewhere in the 20s. And most of them solved. Of course, there wasn't that many that it was difficult. We could put all our resources and make sure that they're solved. Come to work that day, now we have over 3,000. So this was really, really in our backyard. And when I got the phone call, it was disbelief. And then watching on TV, you know, I was sort of cut in half. Because a part of me as the policeman, the detective, the person who takes charge, who does something, very much wanted to be there, needed to be there, because you can't stand by when something like this is happening. But as a father, my son at that point was about 1.5 years, and I lost my mother very young. And the thought of him, the father role played the #1 issue. Who's going to take care of my son? Because who knows if there'll be further events that day, that if she got wiped out, I'll be gone too. And then the babysitter, you know, was wonderful then, but the question of who's going to raise him was a tremendous, you know, I don't know if the word burden, pressure, you know, it was killing me. And so I was fighting. And so on one hand, I was getting dressed. On the other hand, all I wanted to do was hear that she was okay. Because I was going in. I could not sit in Long Beach, where I was living at the time, and just watch CNN. You know, I am CNN. So for me to observe it from, you know, my TV screen doesn't work.
You do get a phone call from your wife.
Yes.
Describe it.
Get a phone call. Her father had a store down on the Lower East Side. And I knew my wife is a typical cop's wife. When I say typical, she knows she doesn't panic. She keeps herself together. And part of herself keeping together would be going to a safe area. So what better safe area would be than going to her father's store on the Lower East Side? And as soon as I heard that she was there, now I was complete again. Now the detective and me took over. I had a job to do. That's where I belong. She didn't belong there. And that's been one of my biggest issues, especially doing my job also in Israel, seeing the civilian aspect of this. Civilians should not be within harm's way. And it just made no sense. I'm not used to this, especially for no reason. And, but thank God she escaped. And ironically, she had injured her ankle in Israel a couple months earlier, and she needed surgery. And there was a suicide bombing in Israel that delayed her surgery on her ankle. So she was on one bad ankle. That cause of terrorism in Israel was directly tied to her escaping the buildings collapsing on 9/11.
And then what do you do during that period of time on 9/11 and 9/12, et cetera?
I just get into the office. And the whole thing there is, I knew since it was such a massive event that you didn't want to be treated as an individual. Meaning, you know, officer, detective, whatever might be the case, direct traffic. So my whole team was off that day, so we all went in together as a team. Initially went down to Ground Zero, not knowing if it would be notifications or what we'd be doing from the site itself. After an hour or two, they sent us back to our office, and we started getting tips. You know, obviously anybody's neighbor, whose last name was Muhammad, now was suspect. And we were getting tips left and right. Thank God, the majority of them were fruitless. But tips were good coming in. In other words, people were aware of what was surrounding them. And then later that evening, I described how, you know, going down again to Ground Zero, It was worse than any horror movie you could ever imagine. I mean, the eeriness of the evening with also the controlled chaos was an unbelievable sight that I'm still registering.
First of all, you know, all of us who were alive and in America or maybe throughout the world, we all remember where we were, how we learned about it, and then watching these two towers come down and this, we've seen it now how many times, the smoke that sort of chased people down the streets. And then there was nothing there but destruction. It was almost what the Midrash describes after the flood, when Noah comes up and he looks out. And it's not a Disney-esque sight, but it's just death and destruction everywhere you look. I don't know whether a person, Morty, experiences that firsthand as you did and somehow shuts it out. But I am asking you, to the extent to which you can, I want you to share with us how you experienced it, personally experienced, getting to this site. What do you see and how do you feel?
I would say, this sounds crazy, but the thing that disturbed me the most, besides for everything that was going on, was where are the victims? Where are these victims? Because at least you could do, if there are victims there, you could do something. You could identify them, you could let a loved one, you literally felt helpless. I'm not a construction worker, so I can't rebuild the site. But at least with doing homicide, there's, from a religious sense, there's taking care, the mitzvah of taking tahara, of just making sure that the body is being kept properly, and whatever religion you are, that there's a respect there. And also some closure for the family. There was no closure. That's why working on, what I describe as tent city for the medical examiner's office was really a wonderful deed that every officer involved got the mitzvah of doing, of just some sort of identity. Because you want to be proactive. You want to at least offer something. It's ironic because, and I talk about all the suicide bombings I went to in Israel, there was always victims there. They were in pieces, it could have just been blood splatter, whatever it might have been, but there was something for Zaka to work with. There was something you could give back to the family. Here there was nothing. It was beyond belief, because I never, in all my years and all the deaths that I encountered, did I ever experience anything like this. And with the giganticness of this, it made no sense. It couldn't, cops see a crazy scene, decapitation, whatever might be the case. You have to be professional and do your job and just put it all together. Here there was nothing to put together. There were so many pieces that were missing where you could actually do and help. So I think that in itself made it like, where is everybody? And we knew they weren't in the hospitals because we had sent detectives to all the hospitals. And again, what could we do? Unfortunately, we couldn't kill the terrorists when they were on the plane. So what could we do now, at least to help with this situation? Identification, notification, some sort of closure, or in this case, even a beginning for the family to realize what happened. Instead of all the surreal scene of seeing all the photographs of missing people. That's not normal. Maybe at a tsunami or something of that nature, but this is not normal.
Did you ever cry?
During the process, you know what? I was so wired. I must have been drinking a gallon of coffee every hour. I'll never forget it. Because I just wanted to stay strong. I think at different stages it builds up. And I can't say that night the tears were flowing, because that night was disbelief. The next day was disbelief. I think the combination of what I've seen that day and with Israel, it's crying on the inside, not on the outside, because, first grade homicide detective doesn't cry. He stays strong, and when my kids have a boo-boo, then the floodgates come open. So that's been my life story, because when it's, what I think happens it's just a buildup that you have to pick and choose the time when you let go. And you know it's a combination of everything. Because to think where I am today is like, you know, living in Israel and just how my whole life has changed. You know, I always reflect back to September 10th, 2001. My wife was a VP of Lehman Brothers, and I was a homicide detective. Now she's living in Israel. She has a keeper company, and I'm terrorist cop. Like, who would ever believe this?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
One more aspect of that day and that period, and I want you to tell me whether you think I'm right or am I romanticizing. There was an experience many Americans had that 9/11 was an expression of horrendous evil, and that there was just this sort of, it took one's breath away. But for me, the immediate aftermath of the planes flying into those two buildings, the aftermath of police, firemen, health professionals, average human beings in New York, doing what seemed to me to be gigantically heroic things, sometimes giving their own lives to try to protect people who were still in danger, that there was a flood of goodness that followed the maniacal destruction of those two buildings. And for me, as much as, and we'll talk about this, as much as it symbolized a new world we live in, where terrorism, especially of extremists, is a reality we must confront, and we're going to talk about how you've done that. You then spent a lifetime doing that. But that, for me, the actual 9/11 was a testimony to the goodness that flows within the human soul, and how this community rallied in an extraordinarily beautiful way. And so for me, of course, it's horrific. But that if one says to me, what do you feel? My feeling was, just look at what people did for other people, beginning with the civil servant, police, fire, health, city, to the average individual. And I'm asking you whether you feel I'm being romantic or whether you understand what I'm talking about.
I understand completely, and it's actually wonderful the way you're describing it, because I don't know if everybody takes that in. I say that day, if you were either a cop, fireman, emergency medical technician, anything in that sort of role, and you called your office to ask if you should come in, you should quit your job because you had a duty without even calling, just going in. So that's sort of part of what we do. But the average civilian, and it could be the construction worker, it could be the people who are holding signs, the people from the Red Cross, the people from DMORT who are helping with identification, all these people who came in throughout the country. It was unbelievable. I mean, the strength that they showed, the heroics, the determination. You know, listen, I never doubted us Americans. And again, I have this always confusion with us, now living in Israel, and us Americans, but I'm speaking now as an American. And I never doubted us. You know, we did rise to the level, and again, we saw how strong we are. And I've always tried to do a sort of a comparison to sort of how Israel responds to terror and how we responded to terror. And I think there's a happy medium in between. But in terms of the average person that day, people on the West Side Highway, I'll never forget, going up and down to the site, were holding signs, were unbelievably supportive. And it was, you were very proud to be a cop that day because you knew that people looked at you and people appreciated what you did. And we in turn appreciated what they were doing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was definitely a good feel, you know, from everybody.
Did you lose friends that day?
One specific police officer who worked in the precinct where my office was. Her name was Moira Smith. She was a beyond hero. Here was a gal, if you're going to call her a gal, she looked like a gal, probably mid to late 20s, uniform officer, married to another uniform officer. I think at that point she had a little girl that was about 6 months old. She worked in the 13th precinct where my office was, which is on 20th between 2nd and 3rd. And she saw the planes going into the towers. I mean, people throughout Manhattan could see what was going on, realized, hearing on the radio what happened. Did not have to be told, go down to the World Trade Center and try to save people. This is what a cop does. Takes the car and goes. Without even asking, just goes. And her and actually another detective who's a good friend of mine started going to the site. And as the buildings were collapsing, as things were falling from the tops of the buildings and people were getting crushed and killed, she was evacuating people to the sidewalk and pulling people out. And there's everyone who saw this. She would go in with this other detective who was off duty, who was there. He worked midnights, had a private job that took him into the World Trade Center. They knew each other very well, and they're carrying people out. Finally, he is carrying somebody. She goes back into the building. That's when the buildings collapsed. She was instantly killed. That's the strength and the bravery and the heroism of this individual is beyond belief. And I can still see her smiling face. I mean, she just had one of these she was a typical Irish cop with a smile and just, you know, the face of Ireland on the face, and just a lovely, lovely, lovely person and woman, cop, the whole package. And, you know, so her, a lot of us knew. And, you know, as far as it's just people who are connected to people. And, you know, it's, again, you can't take it in. Listen, I was so used to calling Israel every terrorist attack, is my family okay, is my family okay, is my family okay? Now it was the reverse commute. Who's there and who's not there?
It's very lovely of you to be able to share that with us. I'm sorry you lost a friend. And for a long time, there was an enormous appreciation in this country for police in a very different way. I feel in time it dissipated. I'm sad about that. But the contribution that was made by you, your colleagues, it was the best, not only of the United States, it was the best of humanity. And you should know how much we appreciate what you did that day. And in some way now, I think many of us appreciate what police, fire, health professionals, but especially police, what you do every day. So you should know.
Thank you.
You should know that. Let's move to Israel now. Again, you write, there's a lot of detail in the book. I want people to get the book, Terrorist Cop. Really an easy, fun, gripping read. And you describe, there is a series of events that ultimately brings you to Israel. And you wrote earlier in the book that you always wanted to be in Israel, even though, and this is now what you say, you did not consider yourself then an ardent Zionist. Do you remember writing that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Morty, what does that mean? You wanted to be in Israel, but you were not an ardent Zionist because you understand you've expressed what many American Jews feel. I want to hear it from you.
I wasn't a B'nai Akivanik, meaning, you know, I didn't every Shabbos, you know, dress up in blue and white. My solidarity, my bonding was with both family and the country, because I felt at home there. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn. I don't think I felt at home in Canarsie. Last spot was Long Beach, Long Island, which is a wonderful community. Didn't quite feel at home. The second I landed at Ben Gurion, I felt at home. There was just something in the air. I don't know what it was. It was either that or the hummus, but one or the other. But there was something there that always made me feel at home. And again, I had very close family there. So I always, it was a slight tug of war, meaning I'm happy here, but I'm also happy there. And that is truly where I feel at home. And I always tell people, you know, especially as an American Jew, you know, when I got on a plane to leave, you know, I wasn't running away from anti-Semitism. It wasn't a pogrom. I had a fabulous life. And I was very happy, and I love America. I mean, America has, you know, like the saying, has been very, very good to me. You know, it really has been really good to me, and I appreciate that. But somehow Israel always did have a special spot. So, you know, again, I wasn't going to events. That's not the way I showed my solidarity. My solidarity was, like I tell my wife to this day, I can't believe we took our honeymoon in Israel. Should have gone to Hawaii. I'm living in Israel now. I have to, you know, I have to go there. So, but you know, that's how I showed it. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't call, you know, I wasn't on anybody's list. I just physically would go, and you know, I especially felt the bond in the first Gulf War. You know, it especially happens when they're in trouble. I always feel like I belong there. And
you went to Israel just prior to the start of the Gulf War.
Well, the Gulf War broke out, and my biggest dilemma was our vacation cycle went from January to January. And Sarel, the Volunteer for Israel Army program, had a month program they were doing during the Gulf War. So I just had to take that year's vacation up front. And I got on a plane and put on an Israeli Army uniform, and the rest was history. But you know, listen, without Israel, we are nothing. That's the bottom line.
Say it again.
Without Israel, we are nothing.
What do you mean?
Israel is the Jewish people's home. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And, you know, you have to be able to stand up for it. And I think the best way is physically to go there. I mean, believe me, I love the diaspora support. You know, I know how special it is to many people, basically all Jews. But if you can, which, again, I was able to. You know, I always say I was destined to make Aliyah, but I was also destined to come back. Meaning I probably would have made it, and 6 months later been on the next plane back. Of course, it is tough. It's not the easiest adjustment. But the way things worked out for me, you know, it's definitely my kids' home. That I'm making sure of. You know, and let them decide then at a later stage after they do the Army and everything else they have to do, you know, where they'll be.
Where do you literally live in Israel?
In Renana.
In Renana. So beautiful community.
Easy landing.
Yes.
I tell people, there's a certain nod of the head when people find out where I live. Oh, so that's why you stayed. Okay. You know, I hate to, nothing disparaging about Beit Shemesh, but if you went to Beit Shemesh, you know, it might have been the reverse commute.
Okay.
But,
you describe in the book how you end up in Israel, but I'm going to summarize it, and then you can amplify if you think it is needed. You become more and more involved in the world of terrorism, and at some point, in essence, the police department, the New York City Police Department, wants you to go to Israel to learn about how Israel is confronting and dealing with suicide bombers and other forms of terrorism, in the hopes that you'll get information back to the New York City Police Department that will help the department here deal with any kind of terrorism that might come towards New York or the United States. Basically, that's correct. Right. Okay. And then you write about when you go to Israel, your assignment initially is not to do police work. Right. You can observe, you can learn. The way you describe it is you were to do intelligence, but you weren't able to be a policeman. And then you describe how that eats at you. I want to hear you tell me, so what happens for you, Morty, as you're in Israel and you see terrorist attack after terrorist attack, and there is a policeman in you who wants to do police work?
First of all, I knew I was a guest. You know, it was made clear to me, and I also made that clear to myself, even though I am Jewish, even though I am another cop, even that I am their guest. So part about being a good guest is respecting your boundaries. Now, the way I could help both sides, and that always, listen, my responsibility was to NYPD. You know, I was working for NYPD, and my ultimate goal was, first and foremost, do whatever I could for New York City. And secondly, it was a wonderful byproduct if I could also help Israel.
You're fluent in Hebrew?
Enough to know the difference between a suicide bomber and a bomb technician, because it's only one letter, and the Israeli police taught me that one quickly.
Was the Israeli police department comfortable with an NYPD cop coming over and being involved?
I'd like to think, because it was me, it actually helped the matter. Again, you know, they knew my role, and I didn't try to make myself to anything that I wasn't.
Yes.
I was always very clear. You know, I'm working for New York City, and my obligation is towards New York City, and I will not do anything that doesn't fall within the boundaries that I should or can do. Doesn't mean I can't help you. And, you know, listen, I'm the biggest advocate. Countries, departments don't share information. They exchange information. And I'm the first one I ever hear when I speak about this topic. People say, oh, we all have to share. Well, you know what motivates more than sharing is exchanging. I'm going to give you something, and you'll get something back. And in essence, I think, because I went in with that attitude, and that's because I came in as a homicide detective. I think that was my strength. I had always learned how to work well with other people, other agencies, and other departments, and, you know, to use crime scene guys and them appreciate what they could do and things of that nature. So I think my approach, in retrospect, was the right approach.
What's the homicide angle here? I didn't understand that. In my mind, and again, this comes a lot from TV more than any real life. By the way, I have someone who works with me full-time who is a former NYPD cop. He was in Fort Apache District. Okay. And a lovely, also very gentle like you, and Jewish kid, you wouldn't imagine. And he took the test because that seemed to be the best path for him. He put his years in. He now is retired, does many things for the police department, and he tells me many, many stories, and it helps me understand more of the real police world. And he says to me, most of the TV shows you see are not real. Every now and then there is a real show. But most of us get our perception of what a homicide cop does is from the TV shows we watch. My sense is, as a layperson, somebody is murdered in New York. Your job as a homicide cop, in part, is to determine who committed the murder and gather enough as evidence to prosecute that individual. But in the case of a suicide bomber, it's clear who did it,
right,
and he's dead.
Right.
So I don't understand why a homicide policeman would be where the relevancy is in terms of the Israeli experience of the suicide bomber.
Well, first and foremost, in my case, because I had done that so long prior, meaning as a homicide detective, I could approach any scene, even something as tremendous as 9/11, and try to have some sort of analytical approach to the scene itself. In other words, okay, I knew the motive in the suicide bomber, radical Islam. Just no ifs, ands, or buts, that's it. The person, there'll be a videotape on Al Jazeera in a couple hours, in their birthday suit or, whatever garb they decide with the rifle. So that was all taken care of. But the first thing I always asked myself, why this location? Was there adequate security at this location? Was there familiarity with the area that made this more? In other words, it was never one person died or 50 people died. There had to be a reason why one person died, because their main goal was maximum casualties. Casualties, killing as many innocent civilians, from babies to elderly. It didn't matter, but it was maximum casualties. So my approach was, okay, why this location? Was there something missing in the security? Were they using a new tactic? Were they using a different sort of explosives? So the first two things are easy. Everyone would comment to me and say, well, the Israelis are so good at this. They analyze a scene in 4 hours. Well, you've answered also two major questions before it even started. The first thing, I go to a crime scene is why? Because if I'm going to interview the person, I at least have an approach. Is this a lover's quarrel? Is this a financial dispute? What is the reason? Well, radicalism. Okay, that's off the bat. And it's Muhammad A. Okay, that's the person. But now we have to take in the whole picture. And my biggest thing, is there something I could take from here and give this back to New York? Is there something here? Is there a lesson I could tweak and translate it to our system in New York? Because I think my big advantage was being a New York cop for so many years. I knew what we're capable of. I knew our relationship with private security. I knew the things that are in place now based on the new programs we have. And how do we tweak it to maximize our protection? And is there any nexus to New York? Does this bomber have a cousin who lives in Brooklyn? Does this bomber have a cousin living in Jersey City? So if I could put that all together and do a comprehensive analysis, and it is an analysis of the entire situation, then I've contributed both to New York and hopefully bringing back something also to Israel.
Now, you write in the book how over time you do become more involved.
Yes.
And I assume you did this without ruffling feathers, that you never write here that the Israeli authorities ever became upset with you.
No.
So you did it in a way that somehow was gracious enough that they accepted your help. Did you learn things in Israel that you believe had tangible effects of a positive nature in the United States?
Well, I could speak for New York City. And again, a lot of the programs we've started in New York City have been translated throughout the country. So yeah, I mean, what I've done, what I try to do, is we'd be thinking about a program. I would show how Israel does it. Let's say from see something, say something. Random bag checks. The different patrol functions that we do. Working with private security. A lot of times to start something new, you have to show why it works somewhere else. Now, you're not going to duplicate it, because Tel Aviv, as much as we like to think is Manhattan, is not Manhattan. Tel Aviv is still Tel Aviv. So as long as you could tweak it. So I like to think that they translated it well here, because I know the programs NYPD is doing now are fabulous. They're keeping up the pressure, which is unbelievable. Most places, it seems to dissipate as time progresses. Like we're getting further and further away. There hasn't been another successful attack. But give Commissioner Kelly all the credit, because he keeps us going and on our toes. And what I also like to think, when I was calling my office back in New York at the Intelligence Division and telling them, it's 3 in the morning in New York, it's 10 o'clock in Israel, and I am at a suicide bombing. This is not Afghanistan, this is not Iraq. This is downtown Tel Aviv. Guys, this is a real problem. Because the worst thing you could do is tell a cop to do something that he'll never get involved with. Of course, you know, I always joke that one day in the academy that I wasn't paying attention was how to deliver a baby. I just, you know, I was 20 years old, and there was just too much blood in this film, so I just didn't want to see it.
Right.
And I'll never forget, I was in Bed-Stuy, and I was working at midnight, and we get a call, you know, that there's a baby on his way, and it's probably not going to make it to the hospital. And I just said to myself, Joe, whatever my partner was that day, I hope you watched the movie that day, because I definitely didn't watch it.
Did it come out all right?
I stayed in the car, so I hope it did. I told the ambulance people what apartment to go to, and I said, I'll watch the ambulance. You don't even have to lock it up. But the bottom line is, it becomes a much more realistic issue. Mm-hmm. And I feel, you know, when I call from Madrid, when I call from Russia, when I call from all these places, I brought the issue home. And again, because, you know, I'm Morty. I'm the guy, you know, who you'll see at the retirement party having a beer with, you know. So this is not a, you know, some Israeli calling, you know, you must do this, you must do that. It was something realistic.
Mm-hmm. Bobby, why do you end up going to all these other countries?
They really appreciated my ability to analyze these scenes. So as Commissioner Kelly said back then, I became their suicide bomb expert.
Everywhere that...
you know, listen, also Israel had the close proximity to many of these places. I mean, when Istanbul, when the 2 synagogues were attacked, I mean, that only made sense that I had to get on the first plane to be there. Again, Jewish community in New York, tremendous community, a wonderful, big, vibrant community. Many synagogues to protect. What went wrong this day? How much warning did the Turkish authorities have? Was there something, again, asking why only 10 people and 100 injured versus 25? There was an answer to this. And you can never just take the newspaper article at face value. Mm-hmm. There's sensationalism there. There's a message that's underground, whether you're watching Fox or you're watching MSNBC. You know, everybody has their own, what they'll bring out of an issue. Well, mine was pure analysis. Police work, so hopefully something concrete, and I got very good at it. Again, this was something I never expected to do. And, you know,
and what does good at it mean, Morty?
Very professional, asking all the right questions.
And getting the right information.
Getting the right information and doing it in a gentle fashion. doing it without, I'll never forget, one of the commissioners came to me and he goes, Morty, by the way, you're going to be on 60 Minutes. There's going to be a film crew coming out to Israel to film you. Oh, they're already there, one of the affiliates. And I said, okay. He goes, do you have blood in your veins? You're not even reacting like it's anything. You just dismissed, Ed Bradley, God rest his soul, that he's coming, you're going to be a part of his feature. And of course, I like to say, other than, doing my memoir, I've tried to be as humble about it as possible. And I think that's the best approach, to sort of, I'm not this is who I am.
How good is Israel at fighting terrorism?
Oh, that's a deep breath. The layperson, meaning when I say layperson, whether you're talking about the Shin Bet, and I think they're probably the best organization in Israel, most professional, and wonderful to interact with. And
what would you analogize them to?
The FBI.
Right.
The FBI without making arrests. The police, the military, they're all, I have not seen them miss an iota throughout this. In other words, heroes, professionals. One thing they did learn after time was skip the top echelon, go right to the middle. That's been one of the reasons of success. You have a manager from one organization speak to a manager, not waiting for a commissioner to speak to a director, to speak to all these people. They have to be in the loop, obviously. But terror is an immediate issue, and it's not something that could wait. This has to be dealt with as, the second you have information, it has to go out to the person. You can't say, because we all have this fear, if the boss doesn't know about it, it didn't happen. Well, it did happen, so you have to keep it that. So there, I have no second guessing, but I do have second guessing of some political decisions. I think the tolerance that Israel shows at times for terrorism is not normal. I just don't understand it. Why did it take, the Passover bombing at the Park Hotel to do Operation Defensive Shield? That should have been after the first suicide bomber. Yeah. They should have gone right in. Who lives that way? The same thing with the rockets. One rocket, and you go right in. So I think, and you cannot blame the person who's taking the orders, who are the policemen, the Shin Bet, the military, the Mossad, whoever else is doing what they're doing. Listen, they've also had a lot of practice. I always tell people, I think New York went through, and again under the leadership of Commissioner Kelly, did such a transformation so quickly. It's a 10-year period now. It took Israel 60 years. They've been dealing with this with day one. So they are good at it, and they should be good at it. But I think the political decisions, the concern of other ramifications, the first responsibility you have is keeping your civilians safe. If you can't do that, I don't care how much you exchange, I don't care how much you do trade, I don't care how prosperous you are, you've failed. So whether you're living in Sderot or whether you're living downtown Tel Aviv, it should be exactly the same.
How concerned should we be about the reality of terrorism from radical Islamic extremists?
I don't like the word concern. I like aware, alert, balanced.
Is it a real threat?
It's a real threat every day. But if you change your life, if you live in fear, or any of these acts happen in other words, if you change a single thing that you do, if you change where you go, how you react, they've won. So what you have to do is, if you knew that somebody was a burglar, the burglar was running in the neighborhood, or just around, you'll put a good alarm in. So as long as you don't put your head in the sand and do whatever you can, every synagogue in the country, in the world, should have some sort of security plan at their fingertips. It should not be what if. It should be, it did happen, now what are you going to do to protect yourself? You have a responsibility, both to the institution and to the membership.
I want to push you a moment. I want to see if you want to make a declarative statement for me. Is there at the moment a real Islamic threat to Western civilization?
Absolutely. Unequivocally.
Does the American administration understand that?
they're definitely afraid to say it. Whether somebody goes home at night and says, and reads the Ford Hood report, this is what it was, but I can't talk about it. Of course, this politician is going to say, now I'm Islamophobic or I'm something of that nature. So I think there's a fear, but the fear isn't against the radicalization. The fear is sounding like I'm just not being politically correct. Call a spade, and that's the bottom line. You're not saying every single one. Like, listen, I have issues with different communities. I have issues with the Jewish community. But one of my issues, let's say specifically with the Muslim community, is only a slight percentage are radical Islamists. But there's not denunciation when something happens. That's what kills me. That's what happens in Israel on a regular basis. That's what happens here. But the first thing is you have to recognize the cancer. Then you treat it.
Were you ever in physical danger yourself?
I think I probably would have been justified to kill quite a few people. And thank God things worked out that I didn't.
You've never had to kill?
No.
You're lucky.
Oh, I preface it with thank God. Mm-hmm. You know, I've grabbed guns out of people's hands. You know, I've put my gun in people's ears, mouths, nose, wherever it fits. You know, because, you know, if I'm nervous, they're going to know I'm nervous. And hopefully I'm justified in being a little nervous.
You wrote a wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But it isn't anywhere near as wonderful as you are in person.
Thank you.
And it's been a real pleasure for me to be able to talk to you. And again, share you with the Shalom TV audience. I hope Terrorist Cop does wonderfully, sells 1 million. But what I hope most is that you will make yourself available to us.
Absolutely.
And you will come from time to time. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha in all you do.
Thank you, Mark.
Morty, thank you
My
very,
pleasure.
very much. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Same here.
I hope you enjoyed meeting Morty Dzikansky, retired NYPD terrorism expert, and the author of a wonderful read, Terrorist Cop, published by Barricade Books. Of course, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts to the ideas expressed by Morty. Please be in touch by mail, by email, or by posting on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.